Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be watching and reacting to a Signore Galilei. I've always messed up the channel's name, but we're going to be watching and reacting to the video of Where Does Australia End? So everyone knows modern day Australia. This is what it looks like. Tasmania down here. Okay, listen. In the past, I thought Tasmania was a separate country, but in fact, it's a state of Australia. That's 100% my bad. But that's younger me in the past. Me now, I know better. But where does Australia end? Modern day Australia, where exactly does that end? Because if you look at when sea levels were lower, Australia, like the tip, went all the way up to like parts of Papua New Guinea, even parts of like a bunch of like that whole archipelago of islands up there, like Indonesia. Lots of parts of it were part of Australia, but modern day Australia, where does it end exactly? And hopefully we'll find out today. I've been meaning to watch this for a while. It's the video. I need to look into more Australia content because I really haven't, you know? I don't know too much about Australia other than they lost a war against the emus because that's memed out of proportion on the internet and that everything there can kill you, essentially. Um, where does Australia end? Australia is famously an island continent, so it seems like an easy question, but it's actually a bit complex. A problem is in the Australia mainland, which definitely ends at its coastline, but rather which of Australia's neighboring islands are actually part of the continent. In terms of biology, geology, and oceanography, Australia could extend far beyond its mainland, potentially even halfway into Indonesia. Let's explore. And I think this is just it does extend it halfway into Indonesia because like if you look at the plate itself, like the Australian plate, those parts would have been part of Australia in the past. Anyways, let's watch the video. The link to this video is in the description down below. Yeah, let's get right into it, man.
Where
Let's
does
get right into
Australia
it.
end? Australia is famously an island continent,
Yes.
so this seems like an easy question, but it's actually a bit complex.
Why?
The problem isn't the Australian mainland, which definitely ends at its coastline, but rather which of Australia's neighboring islands are actually part of the
New
continent.
Zealand isn't. No, I will say New Zealand is its own continent. In the past New Zealand was a lot bigger and it's its own separate thing. So I know it's not
Rather,
New Zealand's
which of
not part of it.
Australia's neighboring islands are actually part of.
I want to say like yeah, it extended up into Papua New Guinea, and I think I want to say it even like it even encompassed a lot of this here as well. I don't know.
The continent. The boundary between Australia and Asia in particular is the trickiest one, and it could plausibly be drawn in any of several different straits, potentially even extending halfway into Indonesia. Let's explore.
Isn't before we even get into the video, aren't there species in Papua New Guinea? What's the other half of this country called? It's Papua New Guinea and something else. I don't remember. But isn't like a lot of the species in here originated from Australia?
Extending halfway into Indonesia. Let's explore.
The video may contain images of people who have passed away. Wondering why this is warning? See the description. What? There was nothing in the description that could have. Okay. Oh, Aboriginal Australian and Torres Strait Islander viewers. I don't know. I don't know what this.
You probably
Okay.
already know where Australia is. It's the
Yes.
place in the southern
Wait,
hemisphere.
wait. Look at this map.
You probably
They forgot New Zealand. New Zealand's not on this map. New Zealand's gone. New Zealand, I guess, should be like theoretically right here on the map. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
already know where
Oh
Australia
my
is.
God.
It's the place in the southern hemisphere
Poor
with
New
the Sydney
Zealand.
Opera House, Uluru, and kangaroos and stuff. All those things can be found on mainland Australia, the Earth's fourth largest landmass after Afro-Eurasia, the Americas, and Antarctica. Knowing this, perhaps the most obvious place to start looking for the boundary between Australia and Asia is at the northern tip of mainland Australia, Cape York.
Oh, Cape York.
Here we find the Torres
Wow, look at this. I didn't realize there's all these islands here dotting the place.
Strait, separating mainland Australia from the island of New Guinea, the world's second largest
New
island
Guinea.
after Greenland. The Torres Strait is 94 miles or 151 kilometers across,
That's
and
not
only
that
about
far.
15 meters or 50 feet deep.
Whoa, really? Only. Wow. That's nothing.
The islands in the Torres Strait, conveniently called the Torres Strait Islands, are part of the Australian state of Queensland and are the traditional home of the Torres Strait Islanders. Culturally, the Torres Strait Islanders are distinct from the Aboriginal people of most of Australia. Instead, they share traditions and genetics more closely with the many Papuan peoples of New Guinea and with the Austronesian peoples of basically half the planet.
I've not seen this map before. Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, Island Southeast Asia, hypothetical Austronesian expansion. So the northern bits and the eastern bits of Australia, New Guinea, parts of Africa, parts of India, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, China, and then we got over here the USA, Mexico, parts of Central America, South America. Interesting.
They also haven't been in Australia quite as long as the mainland Aboriginal peoples, reaching their home islands around 2,500 years ago, compared to the Aboriginal Australians at 60.
Yeah, I was going to say the Aboriginals have been there for like tens of thousands of years, so 65,000, potentially 65,000 years ago.
5,000 or so years ago. That's not to say the Torres Strait Islanders weren't in contact with the Aboriginal people of Queensland. Indeed, the former lingua franca of the islands, Kalaalleq, is at its root an Australian language.
What does that say? Tanakaya. What is this word? It's an O and an E, like mushed together. Koi, Pui, Pathanu, Golka, Ayimka. They cut down a big tree earlier today to make a canoe.
The Torres Strait is certainly very important, but there's a pretty big problem with it being considered the edge of the Australian continent. It's really quite shallow and narrow.
Yeah, look, you can see it right here. This was all part of Australia right here. So maybe it didn't go into Indonesia. Maybe this is. Oh.
In fact, it's both shallower and narrower than the Bass Strait, which separates mainland Australia from Tasmania to the south. Tasmania is a full-on state of Australia the country, or more formally, the Commonwealth of Australia. Plus, it has cultural and historic links to the rest of Australia, so it's basically always counted as part of the continent, and rightly so. Since geologically, New Guinea is even more connected to Australia than Tasmania is, it makes a lot of sense to count it as part of the Australian continent.
I would say,
as well.
yeah, I would say so.
One reasonable limit to the continent of Australia that includes all three of these land masses would be the edge of Australia's continental shelf, the area of shallow seafloor associated with the continent. This definition also includes the Aru Islands of Indonesia, and places the border between Australia and not Australia along a line through the Halmahera Sea, the Seram Sea, the Banda Sea, and the Timor Sea. The Banda Sea also happens to hold the Weber Deep, the deepest part of the ocean floor outside of an oceanic trench.
Wow.
Australia's continental shelf is
I don't know anything about these seas, so this is all new information to me.
called the Sahul Shelf, especially when referring to the northern part of the shelf in the Malay archipelago. The Sahul Shelf, and continental shelves more generally, are very useful to study geologically. Continental crust and oceanic crust are formed from chemically different rocks, and the rocks in continental crust tend to stick around on Earth's surface for much longer. Indeed, the Eastern Pilbara Craton in Western Australia has some of the oldest surface rocks on Earth, at about 3.8 billion years old.
Wow.
The entire Sahul Shelf was also connected by land bridges when the sea levels were lower tens of thousands of years ago during the last glacial maximum. So, the Sahul Shelf is a good definition.
What was this image? What was this? Why? What was this? Go back. Well, who is this? Is this so? Is this someone important? So?
The Sahul Shelf is a good definition for Australia if you're, say, hunting for minerals or investigating the dispersal of species. The study of where species are located,
Wow.
or biogeography, actually points toward an even broader definition of Australia. Australia's wildlife has had the chance to evolve in relative isolation for tens of millions of years since Australia separated from Antarctica. Australia's characteristic animals, like marsupials, are found throughout the Sahul Shelf, including New Guinea with its tree kangaroos, which actually...
New Guinea tree kangaroos? I've never heard of a tree kangaroo before. Oh, that's incredibly cute.
do exist, despite looking and sounding like fake animals.
Fake animals,
But
yeah.
marsupials also
I
extend
don't
even
know
farther
anything about
out.
them.
Marsupials like the couscous are native to several Indonesian islands farther west from the edge of the
Couscous.
Sahul Shelf. The couscous is also present
Couscous?
on the
Couscous.
island of Timor, including the country of Timor-Leste. But zoologists think it was probably brought there by humans before the area's written history. Australian animals more generally, and some of its plants like eucalyptus trees, reach as far as the Wallace line, named for Alfred Russel Wallace, who described it in his 1869 book about the region.
Well, most of like the tree dispersal and stuff. That's mostly attributed to like birds, right? And then like a lot of the animals can be like rafted out, like naturally rafted out to these different locations too. I mean, they're close enough for that to be the case, right?
Wallace took a ferry from the island of Bali to the island of Lombok, across the 15-mile wide Lombok Strait, the narrowest part of the Wallace line. Even across that short gap, Wallace recorded that Asian animals like woodpeckers suddenly gave way to Australian animals like cockatoos. The Lombok Strait is in fact much deeper.
Oh, wow. Is it so? Does this attribute to like a higher ocean current, which would stop a lot of animals from migrating over? I don't. Or no, wouldn't the current be faster if it was shallower? I
Than
don't know.
similarly wide straits between other Indonesian islands, 250 meters or 820 feet deep. This is because it lies at the edge of Southeast Asia's continental shelf, the Sunda Shelf. This means that land species couldn't cross the strait even when sea levels were lower. It
Oh, okay. That makes a lot more sense then.
also makes the Lombok Strait navigable by large ships. And in fact, the government of Indonesia has been promoting the Lombok Strait as an alternative to the congested Strait of Malacca to the northwest. The Lombok Strait is where the Wallace line is the sharpest, but it was a bit more effort to define further north. The hardest island along the border to place is also the largest, Sulawesi. Sulawesi is home to both decidedly Asian species like the anoa, an Asian buffalo, and decidedly Australian species like the aforementioned couscous.
Couscous.
This puzzle
That was a buffalo? That's a buffalo? That looks more like a deer or something, like an antelope or something.
and decidedly Australian species like the aforementioned couscous. This puzzle was solved by tracing the island's geologic history. It turns out that Sulawesi wasn't originally a single island. It's an amalgamation of a piece of Australia and a piece of Asia that collided and merged. So you could argue that the continents of Australia and Asia share a land
Cut right down the middle.
border in the mountains that run down the middle of Sulawesi itself.
That's really cool.
The islands between the Sunda and Sahul continental shelves, including Lombok and Sulawesi, have a mix of Australian and Asian wildlife. Biogeographers often consider them a transitional region between Asia and Australia, called Wallacea. The region of Wallacea isn't just important biologically. The Wallace Line also roughly follows the westernmost branch of the Indonesian throughflow, the ocean currents that carry water from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean. Water comes in from the Pacific primarily through the Strait of Makassar between Sulawesi and Borneo,
trippy.
and flows out into the Indian Ocean through the Lombok Strait, the Timor Sea, and the Ombai Strait between Timor and Alor. So depending on what you need the definition for, the border between Australia and Asia lies somewhere from the Torres Strait through the Lombok Strait. But where does Australia end in all the other directions? Here again, this question of where is Australia really depends on why is Australia.
Why?
From a continental shelf perspective, even some islands that are part of Australian states are not part of the Australian continent.
Oh.
The Lord Howe Island group in New South Wales is geologically part of the mostly submerged continent of Zealandia, along with islands like New Zealand and New Caledonia. Macquarie Island in the state of Tasmania is part of an oceanic ridge to Zealandia's south, and is made of rock from the Earth's mantle. From a political perspective, continents are used for grouping countries together for, say, making UN committees or international sports competitions. It would be rather annoying for Australia to be a continent with only one or two countries, And there are plenty of countries out in the Pacific that aren't geologically part of any continent. For these purposes, Australia is often classified as the largest country in the continent of Oceania, sharing
The continent of Oceania? This is the first I've heard of this as well. You would think I would know about this, but I knew Oceania, but I didn't know that Australia was attributed to Oceania as well.
a continent with New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and other island nations and territories
Wait, all of this is part of Oceania? I thought this was Southeast Asia. What?
across the Pacific.
I always thought Oceania just was attributed to all the islands here in the Pacific. I didn't know it included all everything from Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, Malaysia, like all of this. I didn't know that.
When defined as a cultural unit, Oceania is
Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia.
often defined to reach the far corners of the Polynesian Triangle, Hawaii, and Easter Island or Rapa Nui. From a biogeography perspective, many species in New Zealand are related to those of Australia, in particular those whose ancestors could hypothetically cross the Tasman Sea, like birds and bats. New Caledonia, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu are in a similar situation, leading these areas to be grouped with Australia and Wallacea as the Australasian biogeographic realm. Marsupials in particular are also found in the Americas, including the Virginia opossum, the northernmost wild marsupial.
Yeah, the marsupials were connected to the marsupials in North America. They originated in North America. They originated in the Americas, and they traveled over Antarctica into Australia. Right?
Biologists currently think that
Yeah.
marsupials originated in South America and reached Australia through Antarctica, which has marsupial fossils. One South American marsupial, the Monito del Monte,
That's
is
cute.
more closely related to Australia's marsupials than it is to the other marsupials of the Americas.
Wow.
So whether you're studying rocks, species, cultures, or politics, there's quite a lot more land down under than you might have realized. And while there are certainly reasons to use a smaller definition of Australia, there are also a lot of good reasons to add these additional austral archipelagos to the continent. And I, for one, think they should definitely qualify. Be sure to leave your feedback in the comments and subscribe if you want to see more like this. And as always, thanks for watching.
Interesting. There was a lot in there that I didn't know. It felt like there was just a bunch of information thrown at me in the 9 minutes. It didn't even feel like 9 minutes. Um, I, it just goes to show that I don't know anything about Australia. Supposedly, I don't know a single thing about Australia. I have a lot to learn. I have so much more to learn. Yeah, I'll have to make a note to go out and seek more Australian content. Hmm. Okay. Interesting fact: all opossums in Australia are called possums, based off the Virginia opossum. The word opossum is an Algonquin loan word that was adopted by the English to describe the species. So when Cook encountered them in the late 18th century while sailing around Australia, he named them possums, derived from the shorthand term for opossums. Well, as an Aussie, I was quite happy with everything in this video. Wait, did you say Colify? 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 Qualify? Qualify. I don't know. Ozzy here. I fuck with this explanation. Shit's well researched and and articulated. Citations and descriptions too. Fucking ace. Acknowledgement of Aboriginal culture. Apprehension with pictures of dead. Done amazing. Oh, it's because I see the pictures are of were taken of live people, but they're potentially dead now. I see. So it's like a cultural thing. All right. Love how you considered indigenous viewers. I'm indigenous, and I rarely see this kind of consideration on YouTube. Politically, it's even larger. The Australian Antarctic territory is huge, but even outside of that, you have the Coco Islands and Heard and McDonald Islands and Christmas Islands, as well as the Lord Howe Island. Marquis Island mentioned in the video, pronounced Macquarie. Christmas Island's an interesting one. I always get Christmas Island on Geoguessr. The way I see it, Australia, the country, Oceania, the continent, boundaries of Oceania, half of Indonesia, and Pacific Islands. This was such a good channel, always post bangers, great content, but the voice recording was too soft, as the sudden loudness of the outro music clearly shows. Oh, I enjoyed the video, which brought together with the various viewpoints about Australia. As an Australian, I find outsiders are already so confused about Oz that given the broader views through different scientific research will just bamboozle them. I doubt that many even know about Zealandia. I knew about Zealandia, which would likely never have been identified without the recent advances in satellite imagery. I've learned about Wallace Line, the Sahul biography, and Zealandia in the past. I think it will take a long time for it to filter through the education system here in Oz, since they are so busy with social re-engineering, not scientific stuff. That's true. Social re-engineering is very true. Anyway, we see Australia and Australian continent as the mainland, and Tasmania plus the few surrounding islands and a slab of Antarctica. Tasmania was always known since many ships have passed through Bass Strait in the early years of Tasmania, was one of the penal colonies. Our history acknowledges New Zealand as our closest neighbor, despite the closer distance with the far north. Still, it is quite far away in totally different in many ways. Far north, Queensland was virtually impenetrable for the settlers for most of the Australian history of European settlement. It was far more from the movers and shakers of South Eastern Australia. New Guinea was protectorate of Australia and was not considered to be part of Oz since the water was the boundary of our country. Okay. The Waltzing Matilda. Oh, I skipped it. Isn't Waltzing Matilda the national song? You didn't really go give us a straight answer, just a bunch of suggestions and ideas where it could end, but still a great video. I think that's the point. Like there is no straight answer. It depends on the view that you take at it from, like which scientific view, which like cultural view, which political view you take at it. That's where you get your answer. There's always different views. Excellent depth and breadth in your research. Well done, mate. Love the video. This is some A plus work. Fascinating. Thanks for the deep dive. Love your channel. Would have been good to also include the boundary that encompasses all the islands that are part of Australia politically, or the maritime jurisdiction of Australia. So that's like the Cook Islands and the Christmas Islands, right? What? Yeah. Anyways, if you talk about connection, Arabia was millions of years longer connected to Africa than Eurasia, even though new humans call it part of Asia, what I culturally understand, but not geographically. India too. It's got its own tectonic plate and everything. Yep. Um, can you do New Zealand next? Fascinating. You had no idea. Thank you for the insight. When you mentioned that Australian separated from Antarctica, you don't mention that if Antarctica was covered in ice, and if so, was Australia covered in ice too? No. At the time, the world was warmer. That's for one. That's one thing. The world was warmer because technically we're in like a deep ice age right now. Like we're in a super deep ice age currently. People don't realize that the world is a lot colder now than it normally is, um, and like the continental, like the shifts, like where the continent was, it was a lot further north on the globe. So, yeah. Anyways, isn't Australia an island since it's surrounded by water and it's one country? I don't understand it either. He refers to Australia as being Oceania, but not an island. Hmm. 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 What's your rush in the age and time you are still standing? You're standing still. What is this? This is some bot comment? This is what happened when you don't make the distinction between Australia and Oceania. Sorry, anyone who calls Australia a continent doesn't deserve to go to Australia. Only Americans call the continent Australia. It's either Australasia or Oceania. This is a bit rude, don't you think? Not everyone knows everything. Like, come on, man. Like, what? Like, whatever. Every single person in the continent, but outside of Australia, is insulted heavily when someone refers to the continent as Australia. We don't want to be seen as Australians. Oh, I see. He hates Australians. I see. Okay, noted. Um, I still divide New Guinea in half. The Aboriginals have not been in Australia for 65,000 years. Archaeological evidence shows max 40,000 years. The woke generation has been making up numbers. Soon they'll say 70,000 years. I've read before, even like the wokeness, that they were there for like 60,000 years. So the continent is Oceania. I'm in Kangaroo Land. Why is there a freaking typhoon? What? I guess that just happens in the Pacific. Oh, right here. It's a. Come on. um. Anyways, isn't Australia an island? I already read that. Thank you for the video. I'm definitely going to use this to try some stuff. Try what stuff? What stuff are you going to try? What are you gonna try? As an Australian, I can say Australia is only mainland, Tasmania, Torres Strait, a few islands, and ocean claims. Australia is owned by China and is run by transgender loving prime minister. You forgot that part. Wow. Australia is owned by China and is run by a transgender loving prime minister. I think we're gonna. I think we're going to end it there. Thank you for watching, everybody. The link to this video will be in the description down below. If you like the channel, give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll catch you on the next one, yeah? Take care. Goodbye.